Hi guys, and welcome to the fourth, that's right, installment in the Tales from Animalia section of Semajical Story Time. So it's now time to read mainline story number 4, which is Lennox, the Once and Future King. Lennox was the son of the current king of Animalia, King Leo, who was getting on in years and had been on the throne for the past 80 years. He was now terminally ill, meaning he didn't have very long to live, and Lennox, Prince of Animalia and heir to the throne, was due to take over. He knew he was to become the new king after the death of his father, and was nervous about it. "You'll be a great king, son," King Leo told him, showing lots of faith in him to be the next king. Seeing how scared he was to succeed his father as the future king, Sophie Barnsley Tallensmere, Adam and Leah's half-breed daughter, came to try and encourage him. "Lennox, you can do this. Animalia's going to need a new king when your dad passes away," she told him. "What if I'm not the great king I'm destined to become?" he asked her. "You will be, Lennox. It's destiny, and even the future king can't deny destiny," she told him. Hearing this, hearing this made Lennox gain a newfound confidence in himself, and he appointed Sophie to be his advisor when he was king. She was so thrilled about being appointed as Lennox's royal advisor that she agreed to take the mantle as his advisor. They were in the palace at that moment and were just chatting in the throne room, where they had the sacred crown on display for the past 15 years. "I remember when you found this," said Lennox enthusiastically. "So do I. That was a fantastic day for our land. 15 years is a long time. But that's how long it's been since I found it." "I'm 23 now," replied Sophie. "Ah, yes, 3154 AT. You were only 8 years old then." The current date was the 22nd of July 3169 AT. Over the next few days, Leo passed away due to his illness, and Lennox ascended to the throne and was crowned King of Animalia, being named the Once and Future King by the Board of Destiny. Animalia was sad about Leo's death, but proud to have a new king on the throne. Leo's memorial plaque was added to the royal gallery. It clearly stated that he was born in 3067 AT. He was the son of the previous monarchs, King Leon X and Queen Francine II. He became king in 3089 AT. He was married to Queen Bryony III between 3093 and 3146 AT, when she tragically died in a tiger attack shortly after their son's birth. He was the father to one child, his son Lennox, born in 3146 AT, and died of a terminal illness recently in 3169. His reign lasted from 3089 to 3169 AT, after 80 years. During the next 3 years, Lennox married Janice Cole, a beautiful young lioness, whom she loved to pieces, and fathered a daughter, Princess Lola. Both his queen and little princess were the first royals of their names. Sophie had been advising her king for 3 years now, was now nanny to their daughter, and she loved it. By this point, it was 3172 AT. She was 26 years old, and very pleased to still be under royal employment. But soon came the day of her freedom from that position, because King Lennox and Queen Janice wanted her to have her own life. So she thanked them and left the palace. His Majesty is a very great king, she said to herself. And that was Lennox, the once and future king. Next time, we take a step back in time to see how it all came to be for the continent itself in Genesis Part 1, The Settlers. That's next time I do one of these. So until then, thanks for watching and have a Semajical time. Oh, and please like, comment, share and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Tales from Animalia category of Semajical Story Time, where I'm going to start telling you the backstory of this fictional continent. So, without further ado, let's get into Genesis Part 1, The Settlers. In the ancient times, long before the continent we now know as Animalia was even known to the world, it all began in the far west of our known world. There stood a hidden continent, which was hidden by some very powerful magic. One day, a parade of wild animals came trekking through the land and stopped dead, utterly confused about where they were. There was a lion, a tiger, an elephant, a camel, some birds, and some pigs. Keep in mind this was before humanoid animals that could talk and live in harmony existed. In these times, the animals were socializing in their own way. After a few weeks, the animals met the creatures of the sea and welcomed them to their party in their own way. At this point, every animal in the land has started to glow and started speaking. The magic had finally decided to reveal itself to the animal kingdom. As this was only just starting to happen, the animals could talk but weren't humanoid yet, but would evolve to that point over time as their community developed. Of course, they knew this process was going to take time, but they didn't know how long it was going to take. Maybe 10, 20, 50, or 100 years? They just didn't know, but they enjoyed speculating it all the same. The magic had even assigned them with names such as Lyndon the Lion, Eddie the Elephant, and even Paddy the Pig, to name just a few, and they became the settlers of the land. As they didn't have any buildings yet, they all just made homes in dens and nests at all ends of the continent. After they'd moved into their first homes, they formed a council to decide on a name for their new continent, and decided on the name of Animalia. Once that was decided, they decided to get started building the continent to be an inhabitable place by actually erecting the first buildings on the land, which would then be named the primary nation and would serve as the capital of Animalia, as it was home to the Animalia government building and the royal palace of Animalia. This led to all the animals to crown Lyndon as the first king of Animalia, and elect Eddie as their first minister of Animalia by popular vote. At this point, 2 years had gone by, and the magic had evolved all the animals to become humanoid in order to be able to do their jobs. All the other animals then proposed a referendum to form their own nations within Animalia, and it was passed without a moment's hesitation. King Linden, the first of his name, was a good king so far. And that's it for part 1 of the Genesis arc in the Tales from Animalia. So that's to be continued next time I read one of these stories. In part 2, the nations. Until then, if you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a Semajical time. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Zediverse category of Semajical Story Time, where it's now time to read, well, the 4th story overall for the franchise, which will be the 3rd in the mainline series. And that story is The Zedas Unite, Chromosome Z3. 11 years ago, the Branston siblings met Jack O'Horn, who had the power to generate whirlwinds. And he was dubbed Whirlwind due to his ability, and they went out on their first group mission to stop a gang of robbers, and managed to stop them. It was now 2013, and the Zedas had welcomed new recruit Sophie McLean, whose ability was to split into multiple versions of herself. So they assigned her with the hero name of Miss Multiple, and she was the 7th member of the team, considering they recruited 4th, 5th and 6th members in that time as well. The team's 4th member was Ash Poole, also known as Sonic, Seer and Hearer, due to his ability to see and hear trouble before it happened. The 5th member was Molly Cameron, also known as Instantaneous due to her ability to teleport. And the 6th member was Leo Gaston, also known as Hollow Man, due to his ability to turn invisible at will. One very busy Monday morning, all 7 of the Zedas had decided to unite for a team mission to stop a massive crime wave that had broken out. They arrived as soon as 2 kidnappers were trying to force a toddler into their car. "We need to stop this!" exclaimed Oliver. "I agree, Oliver," said Ella. "Zeta forms, everyone," Jack ordered, and they all morphed into their Zeta forms. Chrono took charge and gave everyone their assignments. "Human Plane, get up there and keep watch in case anything else happens," he told Human Plane. And she ran off to the end of the road and took off into the sky to do her bit. Chrono stationed Whirlwind above the city with orders to generate strong whirlwinds every time someone was robbed, kidnapped or more. Hollow Man at the entrance to a bank where he was invisible. As he was invisible, they were at a great advantage. He'd already knocked out a trio of thugs who tried to assault a young woman. Miss Multiple was helping the police to catch a murderer. Just as he tried to kill her, She split into 3 copies and sent her 3rd copy to help prevent a mugger from mugging a young woman across the street, whilst her 2nd copy stayed to help her out of the scrape she was in. Once out of it, she sent her 2nd self to help stop the kidnapping down the street. She ran off to help the police to arrest a gang of murderers. She rounded them up and split into 10 more replicas and sent them to help at all ends of the city. Instantaneous had just teleported from the police station after apprehending a gang of thieves. "That was some job," she said, as she rounded up 5 more criminals and teleported away to put them in police custody. Human Plane was given orders to intervene by blowing leaves from the trees to stop a gang of shoplifters getting away, which she did, and Instantaneous escorted them to the police station via her teleportation ability. Hollow Man and Whirlwind had teamed up to fight a drunk man before Chrono popped back from the future and busted out his megaphone. "We're nearly done now. We're nearly done, guys," he announced to his team. He popped 5 minutes into the future to see the outcome of their intervention. He called them all together again, and they hid around the corner to power down to their civilian forms, and Sophie's replicas faded out of existence. They watched as the remaining criminals were carted off to jail. Ash was amazed when he found out, and as he remained outside the city and saw everything that happened as it did, and then picked up sound from their base. "We need to return to base," he said. "What's up?" asked Leo. "I heard something. I think someone broke in," replied Ash, and they all rushed off. "No one but us knows where the base is," said Sophie, as they arrived back at base and went in to investigate. What they found there was an 11-year-old boy. "Oh hey, it's just a kid," said Jack. The boy put out his hand and everything stopped. He put his hand down and everything returned to normal. "What's your name, son?" asked Oliver. "Timothy Fielding," replied the boy. The Zedders were impressed by what Tim could do and told him that he had chromosome Z, explaining to him what it is, and assigned him with the Zedder name of the Controller due to his ability. This gave Ella the idea to start a school to train Zedders in how to use their powers and how to control them, and teach about what chromosome Z was for those who didn't know. The school would be hidden away from normal people, and they decided to train students in their building just underneath Mission Control. "We need to expand our space to accommodate an entire school," said Sophie, and they decided to start expanding for their campus. And that was Zedders Unite. And it should lead us nicely into our next spin-off series, Branston Academy. But I think there may be one more mainline story to go before then. Wait and see. If you like this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching and have a magical time. Hi guys, and welcome back to the Zediverse category of Semajical Story Time, where it's now time for the 5th story of the whole franchise and part 1 of the 2nd of the spin-off stories. And that would be Branston Academy First Class. It was the end of summer 2032, and Branston Academy for Zedders had just opened its doors to students at last. The first group of students had just arrived on campus, and they couldn't wait to begin their years of academy training. Among them were the children of the core teaching staff. Professor Zeller and Oliver Branston were the leaders of the Founders Committee, as well as the headmistress and deputy headmaster of the school. Oliver was also the professor of their power honing and control class, and head of Branston House. Professor Jack O'Horn was treasurer of the Founders Committee, as well as professor of their public defense class and head of O'Horn House. Professor Sophie Pollock was scribe at the Founders Committee, as well as professor of their Zeta history class and head of Pollock House. Professor Molly MacDonald was dictator at the Founders Committee, as well as professor of their Zeta science class and head of MacDonald House. Professor Ash Poole was councillor of the Chancellor's Committee, as well as professor of their Sensing Trouble class, and Professor Leo Gaston was proofer of the Founders Committee, as well as professor of their Secret Identities Importance class. Once they'd chosen members for their houses, they led their students to their house dormitories for the first time. In the Branston common room, Professor Oliver Branston was showing the boys to their dormitories, while his sister, Professor Ella, showed the girls to theirs. Oliver's daughter, Madison, was nervous about attending the school. Her power was gillimorph, which made her grow gills when underwater, allowing her to breathe underwater. Ella's son, Julian, on the other hand, was feeling confident about it and tried to make Madison feel more confident. His power was legilimency, which allowed him to see into other people's minds. Classes began the next morning at 9 o'clock, and their first power honing and control lesson with Professor Oliver Branston was first on their timetables. He got each of them to get up and demonstrate their powers for the rest of the class, and teaching them how to hone their powers. Before his class ended, he demonstrated his power by stopping the clock for a second before putting it back to normal again. The bell rang and he dismissed them, but Madison stayed behind. "Look sharp, Maddie. You don't want to be late for your first Secret Identities Importance lesson," he told her. "Of course not, Dad. I was hoping for some advice," she replied. Oliver listened to his daughter's problem and advised her to try and ignore the discomfort, and sent her to her first C class with Professor Gaston, for which she was 10 minutes late. She apologized for being late and sat between Gregory Jones and Raymond Green. Professor Gaston was going around the room asking what their powers were and assigning them with secret code names based on their powers and what they allowed them to do. He arrived in front of Madison. "Madison Branston, what's your power?" he asked. "I'm gillimorphic, sir," she replied. "Which is the ability to breathe underwater by way of growing gills?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied. He took them out into the pool and had her demonstrate it by going underwater for 30 seconds before getting her out to dry off and get dressed again. Once she was back to normal, he thought for a moment. "Gilly girl," he said finally, before getting on with the lesson, having just enough time to give them their first Importance of Secret Identities lecture. After their class, he kept Madison behind and told her he was going to let her off with a warning that she'd get a detention if she was late again, before letting her proceed to her next class. One student, a boy named Sidney Collinson, whose power was creation, which obviously allowed him to create life, and had been assigned with the secret identity of the Creator, which he thought was stupid, so started calling himself God, which offended the staff and students due to the blasphemous nature of it. This led the Branston siblings to call an emergency committee meeting to determine how to discipline Sidney before it got out of control. And he abused his power by creating an army of evil soldiers. They summoned him to their office that Saturday for his disciplinary hearing, where they questioned him about his behavior. "You cannot use that name in this school," Professor Gaston scolded. "Why not?" "It's my power," said Sidney. "We know, but it's offensive for you to go around claiming to be God," Professor MacDonald scolded. "But professors," Sidney began, but Professor Pollock addressed him. "Sidney Collinson, as your head of house and scribe of the Branston Academy Founders Committee, I have been forced to recommend you be expelled from this school," she scolded. "You can't expel me," thundered Sidney. At this point, the headmistress, Professor Ella Branston, stood up. "We can and will expel you if you don't cease using that blasphemous code name," she warned him. "I'm not giving up the name. It suits me," he said rudely. "In that case, you leave us no choice but to approve the recommendation of Professor Pollock. Sidney Collinson, for your persistence to use an offensive code name and refusing to cease and desist using it, you are hereby expelled from Branston Academy for Zedders. Once we are done here, you are to go and pack your bags and be escorted off these premises." She told him, banging the gavel, making the punishment official. So Sidney was escorted off the premises within the next half hour. He hadn't even lasted a month, and he'd already been expelled. "This is no way to start a school for Zedders. It's only been a week, and we've already had to expel a student," said Oliver, shaking his head. And that was Zedders Academy First Class. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode of the show. Until then, thanks for watching and have a Semajical time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Fairyland Tales, the segment of Semajical Story Time where I read the Fairyland Tales series. It's now time for the 8th installment in that series, which will be New Child in Fairyland. It was a joyous time in Fairyland as Illyria and her half-blood husband Milton Keynes had just welcomed their newborn son Jack Keynes to the ever-growing fairy population. As he was the son of a pure-blood fairy and a half-blood, part man, part fairy, they had to register his blood status as a quarter-blood, the first of his kind at the Fairy Council Registry in Births. This made him a special child, as he may grow up with around 8 times the usual amount of fairy magic. This confirmed Milton's magic as a half-blood to be around 4 times that of a normal fairy. That afternoon they had a party to celebrate their son's birth, which lasted 2 days due to Jack being the son of Illyria and Milton. Made him the grandson of Chronica, Milton's mother, who in life was the Time Fairy, a job and title that he had inherited after learning she was his mother and she'd been executed for falling in love and having a child with a human, breaking one of Fairyland's most important laws. This was Jack's time magic developing, the family power passing on to him. Over the next 5 years, they brought Jack up as a fairly normal boy with Milton, while Milton trained him in how to use his brand of magic and when the appropriate time to use it was. After a few days, Jack started fairy primary school, whilst his parents returned to their jobs at the Fairy Council. Illyria worked in the Office of Fairy Education as their current Minister for the Education of Fairies. Including their new tertiary education program, which she created for the purpose of training newly graduated fairy school fairies in preparation for their future careers. So she served a double role as both MEF and the head of the tertiary education program, which was basically the University of Fairyland, which he set up within the safety of the Fairy Council. This now required the graduating class of secondary fairy education to sit and pass their new tertiary placement exam in order to determine their placement in her program. Milton worked for the Fairy Code Task Force as their guardian of time, which he'd already surpassed Chronica at. Jack was in the first year of primary fairy education and was already starting to show promise. Being mostly human meant he was growing at the same rate as a human. His fairy magic was his fairy genetics, which he only had a quarter of in his DNA, giving him around 8 times the usual amount of fairy magic. He already knew what his future career was going to be, and as destined by his brand of magic. It also meant he'd go through the same levels of education as a human would. For qualifying young fairies, the age to enter the tertiary education program was 345, and graduation would come 155 years later at 510. 2 years before their twinkling. He, however, would be 18 when he would enter either the tertiary fairy education program and graduate at 21, or he'd enter the Fairy Code Task Force Academy at 18 and qualify as an agent at either 22 or 23, depending on whether they would accept him into the Level 1 or Level 2 training course. Whilst pure-blood fairies twinkled at the age of 512, making them adults in Fairyland, he would basically just be considered of age at 21 as a human would. He'd already befriended a young twinklet named Wanda, who loved hanging out with him. And that was New Child in Fairyland. Stay tuned for the next story in this category. But until then, if you enjoyed this one, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a Semajical time. Hey guys, welcome back to the oldest man segment of Semajical Story Time, where I'll read all of those stories. And story number 6 in this section is Son of the Oldest Man, which we're going to get right into reading. Here we go. Jack Keynes was the quarter-blood son of Fairy Illyria and half-blood Milton Keynes, which made him roughly twice as powerful as he ought to be, considering his parentage. He was also the grandson of Sirius, Darla and Chronica, and Stephen Keynes. This meant he held the power of time magic in his blood, as inherited from his father, who had inherited it in turn from his mother. Jack was now 12 years old, and was well on his way to joining the TCTF as one of their agents, so he was on the track of destiny to become the TCTF's next agent of time, meaning his further education in Fairyland would be with TCTF Academy as a cadet to be trained as an agent. However, he'd be starting their new Level 3 course, which meant he would begin at 18 and graduate from it after 6 years, and would first be ranked up to an officer for the force, which would promote him to their officer of time. He was on a school trip with the to the Fairy Council offices, which he was most fascinated by. Their guide was an officer of the Fairy Code Task Force named Fizzleblitz, who had worked for the force since she was 531, which was roughly only 5 years earlier. Okay. Jack thought she should have been an agent by this time, but learned it was after at least 5 years of working as an officer that a member of the force could be promoted to senior officer, and at least 10 for a potential promotion to agent in normal circumstances. Given yours, Jack, my boy, you'll most likely skip 3 ranks and get agent straight away. Your dad did, she told him. Jack was stunned to learn this and admired his father more deeply than before. She took the tour group through the lowest offices in the council, which were the offices of fairy maintenance and sanitation, for which fairies worked to keep Fairyland clean and up to code. It was headed by Commissioner Tang Tang and didn't need much qualification to work as an officer of this department. You could even enter these offices with no qualifications whatsoever, she told them. Jack couldn't imagine anyone in his class wanting to work in these offices. Next, Fizzleblitz showed them around the second lowest department in the council, the offices of mischief and pest control, for which they'd need to hold the qualifications of mischief mastery and the pest control certificate. It was headed by Chief Knave Buzzard for the mischief division and Captain Dustbuster for the pest control division. Sprites and red pixies were considered household pests in Fairyland. Jack was pleased to meet the officers and heads of this department. After a snack break in the cafeteria, Fizzleblitz took the group on a tour of the third lowest department of the council, the offices of charity and orphan housing, which was headed by Chief Flutterwings for the whole department, and officers here required qualifications in real estate and just a general caring attitude for charity. Jack thought this should be a higher department. After lunch, Fizzleblitz showed the group around the fourth highest department of the council, the offices of fairy housing, nature and conservation, which required officers to hold qualifications in fairy real estate, horticulture, agriculture and forestry, and headed by Dr. Fizzledrizzle for everything in the department. This actually caught the interest of quite a few twinklets, especially Twilight Glitterbling, Dr. Fizzledrizzle's granddaughter. Next, Fizzleblitz showed them the third highest department in the council, the offices of fairy education where Illyria worked. It housed the offices of primary, secondary and tertiary fairy education, which was headed by Angel Wings for primary, Professor Shimmering for secondary, and Illyria herself for tertiary. And she was its founder. Officers in this department required qualifications and experience teaching either the first of either of the first two levels, which he knew she once taught primary fairy education before he was born. Mother and son were very pleased to see each other. Then Fizzleblitz showed them the second highest department of the council, the offices of fairy law enforcement, which required officers to be qualified in all aspects of fairy law, which housed the Fairyland Law Firm, the Darkness Patrol Unit, Fairyland Courtrooms, and the Fairy Code Task Force, where she worked as an officer alongside Milton, who was their agent of time, and was working through his case files to get them in order before accepting his next mission for the Force. And finally, she took them to visit the highest officers of the council, the High Council of Fairies. Holders of office in this department required qualifications in fairy medicine, nursing, and of course, fairy education. To hold the minister's office, they just needed qualifications in fairy politics and experience in any of the three highest departments. Jack was already destined to become the next agent of time for the FCTF. At the end of the day, he went to wait at Sirius and Starla's house until his parents finished work. He told them about his tour of the Fairyland Council offices and how amazing it was. At 6 o'clock, Milton and Illyria came to collect him and take him home. So that was Son of the Oldest Man. Stay tuned for the next story of this category, as stories coming soon, but not too soon. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a magical time. The Naughty Princess. Princess Primrose was the daughter of King Roland the 110th and Queen Eve the 103rd of West Mayerville, the capital city of a country called Knoxylvania, which is located in the far north of Europe. She was 9 years old and behaved in a manner they didn't like and very improperly for a princess. Primrose was a very naughty princess who outright refused to conform to anything considered proper for a princess. She had no sense of etiquette and good behavior, and King Roland and Queen Eve were fed up with her naughty behavior. Her nanny, Mrs. Vendergast, was at a loss for knowing what to do about her behavior. She was trying to get her to pay attention to her royal tutor, Sir Adam Hughes, who was trying to train her in royal etiquette, and as usual wasn't getting anywhere. So she wasn't listening to him. "Will you please pay attention, your naughtiness?" he said angrily. "Its Highness, you fool! I'm a princess," she replied very rudely. Mrs. Vendergast was so shocked by this she smacked her on the wrist. "Primrose Mosley, you are so very rude and naughty. How dare you refuse to listen to Sir Adam and then speak to him like that?" she scolded. "I'm a princess and I don't apologize," replied Primrose rudely. "The way you behave, anyone would think you're another spoiled brat. You call yourself a princess? You certainly don't act one. That should be like one," Mrs. Vendergast scolded. Primrose just sat there pulling rude faces and making gestures that were not fitting for a princess. The news especially angered King Roland and Queen Eve, who, when they caught her at it, punished her with 2 months' worth of early bedtimes, and a month in the dungeons being treated like the criminal she acted. This sentence was given to her as a form of lesson in how criminal behavior would land her in jail if she was one of their subjects. If this didn't teach her the lesson they hoped it would, they'd have no choice but to send her to Baddington School for naughty children as a princess in disgrace. The news that she'd have to go there and mix with other naughty children who weren't rich or important made her have a long, hard think about her behavior, as she didn't want to mix with any peasants, as she called them. It had worked, as she started regretting her behavior and was released from her punishments before time was up. She did then start taking her lessons in royal etiquette seriously and applied herself to princess training very diligently. So that was The Naughty Princess, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching, and have a Semajical time. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Semajical Story Time and another story in the Zetaverse category. We're continuing on with the spin-off. This is part 2 of Branston Academy First Class. This is a Zeta's Education. It was a very busy first term at Branston Academy for Zetas, as the staff and students were working hard to keep up appearances in the school. This was because the Founders Committee had had to expel one of their students for giving himself a blasphemous code name, and refused to cease using it. The student's ability was that of creation, and he decided to rename himself God from the Creator, and was expelled for his act of blasphemy. It had been 2 weeks since then, and there was now a school-wide ban on the use of his name, Civilian or Zeta. Doing so would lead to the automatic expulsion of the student who uttered either name. In order to prevent any such utterance of either name, the Founders Committee had appointed Madison's mum, Morgana, as the school's chief disciplinarian, due to her power of precision judgment, which granted her the ability to scan people's minds to determine precisely whether or not they were innocent. If she read guilt on a person's mind, she'd read the precise level of guilt to punish them accordingly, with what crime or misbehavior they were guilty of. This earned her the code name the Precision Judge, which suited her perfectly. It was the middle of the night and 2 boys were out of bed wandering the corridors. Their names were Thomas Fillmore and Justin Jarrett, and they were practicing their powers. Justin's power was invisibility, which obviously allowed him to become invisible, but he hadn't demonstrated it yet, so he made himself invisible for a minute before returning to normal. Thomas's power was elemental control, which allowed him to control the elements, and as such he'd used it to form a puddle on the floor into an ice statue, which was now standing by the entrance to the main hall. "Fillmore! Jarrett!" called a strict voice. It was Mrs. Branston, and she was not happy. "What are you doing out of bed? It's the middle of the night," she told them. Before the boys could answer, she escorted them to her office to question them. After questioning them for 15 minutes, and getting no satisfactory answers from either of them, she was forced to use her power on them, and learn. They were both just as guilty of breaking curfew after planning to do so between each other. "That's a detention for each of you, and let me see. I think 30 points from Branston House. Never let me catch you in the dead of night again. Back to bed this instant," she scolded, and sent them back to bed at once. By breakfast time next morning, the whole school knew it, and Madison shot the boys a warning look. "Don't even think about it, you two. My mum's already had to give you separate detentions and dock 30 points from us because of your behavior last night. Sit down and wait until Professor Branston dismiss us." she warned them. And they sat down. Classes were normal all morning until Professor Oliver Branston called on them in turn to demonstrate their powers, and they did. After seeing Thomas walk over to a live fire and use his power to bend and twist it into a sculpture upon turning it solid, as though he'd just built an incredibly detailed clay sculpture, Madison was most impressed. Tom, did you make that ice sculpture out that now stands at the main entrance? She asked. I did indeed, Maddie, he replied. So that was Ozeda's education. The next story in this category is the fourth mainline story. So I will see you for that one eventually. But until then, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a magical time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Semajical Story Time for the Destinyverse section. And it's now time for the 16th of these stories, but the 9th mainline story, Destiny 9. Here we go. London, 1954. Destiny Ball was a sprightly woman of 70 who lived happily with her family. It was a lovely summer's day and they were all at the beach enjoying each other's company. Destiny, Crystal, Norman, Dennis, Mitzi, Lily and Jake Burns were relaxing in the shade while Daniel and Sandra had fun in the sea. Jake Burns was Lily's boyfriend, and Destiny was most pleased to see her granddaughter so happy. Crystal, on the other hand, was worried this might be a silly crush. Why can't you be happy for your daughter? Asked Destiny. Because I don't believe it's real. I think Jake might be after something more, replied Crystal. Come on, sweetie, can't you just give him a chance to show you otherwise? Asked Destiny, knowing she was right about it. This left Crystal wondering if she was being too overprotective of her 16-year-old daughter. Destiny took Lily and Jake somewhere quiet to talk about their relationship, during which Jake assured her he wanted to make Lily happy. She was happy with this and encouraged them to talk to Crystal and Norman about it, which they did, only to be given their full approval. They thanked Destiny for helping them out, which she was only too happy to do. You have infinite wisdom, Grandma, said Lily. Sweetheart, I'm 70 years old now. I've been giving this kind of advice to children for over half my life. Destiny laughed and hugged her granddaughter. Daniel and Sandra finished frolicking in the sea and came to rest and have something to eat and drink. By this time, they were 5 and 9 years old. Destiny, Crystal and Norman teamed up to reassure them about starting school, as they could see he was worried about it. I'll be there to look out for you, Sandra promised him. Destiny was really proud of her grandchildren for being so good to each other. Lily then added the fact that she'd been teaching them the importance of family values during her hours babysitting them, the last few times she babysat them. "I do these things because I love you both very much," she told them. Destiny gave her a very approving look. "You are a very mature and sensible young lady," she told her proudly. "I learned it all from my own mum and grandma when I was growing up," replied Lily. Destiny was overcome with happiness at these words and hugged Lily tightly with love. "I love you so much, dear granddaughter." It was starting to cloud over, so they packed everything up and started to make their way home after a lovely day at the beach. When they got home, Destiny helped Crystal and Norman get Daniel ready for bed, while Lily had a bath and got herself ready for bed. Destiny couldn't be prouder of herself and her family. So that was Destiny 9. There are no more stories currently for this collection of stories, but as soon as there is another one, you know what's going to happen. Until then, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a magical time. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Fairyland Tales section of Semajical Story Time, where it's now time to read the 9th of these stories. Illyria, Minister of All Education. Illyria had been running the Department of Tertiary Fairy Education for the past 20 years and had been summoned to the ministries by the Prime Minister of Fairyland to discuss her hard work as their head of tertiary fairy education, and offer her the office of Minister of All Education in Fairyland from nursery to tertiary, which had since been upgraded to include her level. This promotion included that pay rise and authority over education on all levels, and it would be up to her who got accepted into the program and who didn't. She was thrilled and accepted it on the spot. She was shown to her office and took to it straight away. Once she settled into her new job, she appointed her former deputy as the new head of tertiary fairy education. "It's my job to oversee all education here in Fairyland. As Minister of All Education, I need to decide whether to accept, promote, demote, hold back, suspend and expel fairies of all stages into and from fairy education. It's a huge task, but I'm up to it," she said to herself. Moments later, she had a student from the secondary fairy education program in her office for a disciplinary hearing, after being caught trying to sneak out into the human world without a license, as he wasn't qualified yet. His name was Mars Dazzler. He was 438 years old and in his 14th year of secondary fairy education. He had been summoned to her office after being arrested by the FCTF, who busted him for attempting to use the portal unaccompanied and unlicensed. "Please, Minister, don't punish me too harshly," he begged. "Mr. Dazzler, you are charged with attempted portal travel without a license or accompaniment of your tutor or a guardian. That's an offence on the expulsion level for a fairy in training, she scolded. I can't afford to be expelled, Minister. Please, he begged. I'm sorry, Mars Dazzler, but you leave me no choice. You are guilty of breaching one of Fairyland's most important laws, so you are therefore expelled from all of fairy education, effective immediately, she scolded, ripping up his student identification, and wiped all his achievements from the record, before handing him over to the FCTF for further punishment. Brutal, huh? But that was Illyria, Minister of all Education. So join me next time for the 10th of these stories, whenever that happens. It won't be the very next episode. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a Semajical time. Hi guys, and welcome back to the Tales from Animalia category of Semajical Story Time for the 6th of the mainline stories, and that would be Genesis 2, The Nations. So this is chronologically the second story of the universe. Here we go. Over the past 50 years in Animalia, all the animal types have branched off into their own separate nations, with countries named in reference to the types of animals who lived in that nation, and led by their own officers in government. Obviously, there's a primary nation, which is the capital of the continent, in which the continent's main government, the Ministry of Animalia, led by their current minister Ryan Foel, a strong stallion, who was a great leader, and the home of their ruler, King Lyndon I, a lion who ruled with an iron claw. Residents are all different types of animals. It was he who granted permission for other animal types to form their own nations. This was his 52nd year as king of Animalia, and his daughter, Princess Rowena, was next in line to the throne. His wife, Queen Melanie, was killed by tigers 3 years before. It was her birthright as his eldest child. Up high in the Sky Nations have been established, ruled by King Cocky, a cockerel, whose home was Cluckingham Palace, and governed by the Parliament of Owls and the Tribune of Parliament, led by the Prime Owl Minister, Oliver Wappler. All residents of these nations are birds. In the depths of the oceans, the Aqua Nations, where dwell all aquatic animals. Their capital is the country of Finland, where their rulers, Prince Edward and Princess Harriet, who ruled from Castle Tritonia, in the heart of the country. It'll also be the home of Animalia's syndicate of organised crime run by sharks who terrorise the whole ocean. They are governed by the dolphins from the Dolphinicum Republic, led by the Grand Dolphin Peter Finlay. On land we have the Equine Nations, in which all the continent's horses and zebras live. The Shetlands are their capital, which is where their capital building is. It is the dwelling of the Queen Elizabeth rules from, and the Grand Paddocks, in which their government body, the Goodwood Grand National Ministry, is led by Elias Brown, their current minister. The Desert Nations of Camelot, where all the camels live. It is also where the Grand Camel Callum Mirage was both ruler and minister. And finally there's the Pork Nations, where all types of pigs reside. Their capital is the country of Hamerica, where their ruler President Mike Bacon resides and runs these nations from. The United Pork Nations are also located here. There you go, Animalia is now a fully formed continent with its own nations and governments and rulers. As king of the continent, Lyndon was required to visit all the nations which he could do thanks to the magic of the continent. This meant Princess Rowena was placed in charge whilst he was attending to his royal duties. King of Animalia, and this was one of those times. She was next in the line of succession. As she was next in the line of succession, she needed the practice for when it came time for her ascension and coronation. So that was Genesis 2, The Nations. The third of these prequel stories, The Royal Test of Worthiness, will be coming eventually. Keep a lookout for it. Until then, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have a magical time. Hi guys, and welcome back after a very long time to the stories from my live segment of Semajical Story Time, the part of the series where I tell you some stories from my childhood, or from my life. Be warned, there may be some exaggerations to make them sound more exciting. Anyway, I'm going to tell you a story from the 23rd of June 2004. Now, this was on the week that I was leaving school at Glenwood in Emsworth. So my last week of school as a year 11, for those of you from across the pond over in America, our year 11 is the same thing as your 10th grade. Just to clear that up for you. It's the same age group and everything. So, with the notable differences, we take GCSEs at the end of that year. Now, this was our end of year trip to Thorpe Park, which is a theme park here in Great Britain, here in England, in the Surrey area. And while we were there, I went on the Colossus 3 times. Now, the Colossus was a roller coaster that did 10 loop-the-loops, and that already sounds exciting enough without any exaggerations. Now, I was 16 at the time, so bear that in mind. It was 19 years ago. So, and on my, I went on the ride, I think twice or 3 times. Anyway, on my second go on the ride, something strange happened. As we were going on the first couple of loop-the-loops, the whole ride began to spiral round and round like this, and suddenly I and everyone else on the roller coaster found ourselves in Coasterland, a land of roller coasters of all shapes and sizes and of all kinds. And it was our first and only trip into Coasterland. And what did we see from our roller coaster cars? Well, a whole world of living roller coasters. Yes, that's what I said. Living roller coasters. They have minds and lives of their own, and they decided which passengers they were and were not going to allow into their cars. And if there was someone they didn't like, they just barred access to the car the person was trying to get into. Now, as our roller coaster started up again on the loop-the-loops, it started slow and really fast. We saw a roller coaster on the other side of the land, the Dragon, forcefully ejecting the people in the front 2 cars, to put it bluntly, for being douchebags to the people behind and in front of them. And it ejected them through a mouth that opened up at its front and just chucked them out through a simulated fire, which was mainly nothing more than red lights mixed with yellow to make orange, and a smoke machine built into the front of the roller coaster. And when our roller coaster started to speed up on the loop-the-loops, as soon as we got to the 10th one, we were whirled back into Thorpe Park, back to where we started. And the teacher who was guiding me around the park, Mr. Prattley, yeah, go ahead, laugh if you want, that was his name, got me off the roller coaster safely. And then we went back to meet and then we went around the park. Now, the one ride I didn't want to go on while there was the tidal wave, which is this water ride that splashes you with a tidal wave as soon as you hit the bottom. Now, of course, the Colossus, in reality, doesn't whirl you around into a land of roller coasters on the second loop-the-loop. That was the exaggeration. There's no such place as Coasterland. That's another exaggeration. and nor was there any such thing as a roller coaster that forcefully ejects its passengers through its mouth via a smoke machine. That is another exaggeration. Though there isn't actually. I don't think there's a roller coaster even called the Dragon at Thorpe Park, but there is at another theme park. And I know you guys across the pond call these places amusement parks. Well, we call kiddies theme parks amusement parks here in this country, not family theme parks. So just keep that in mind. So that's another edition of Stories from My Life. I hope you enjoyed the adventure I turned it into with my exaggerations. The next one of these won't be for a while, as I need to actually think of a way to make another story from my life sound more exciting than it probably was already. Okay. So if you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have a Semajical time. Hey guys, and welcome back to the Amazing World segment of Semajical Story Time, where it's now time to jump into the next story I'm going to be reading for the series, the 10th story I'm going to be reading for the series, Out of Sequence. Thomas White was an ordinary young man in his early 30s. He was happily married and had 2 kids, whom he loved to pieces. He was on his way to bed one night when he felt a strange sensation in his body. As he and his wife were settling down for the night, the sensation started to take effect. "Thomas, sweetie, can you hear me?" she panicked, as he went into a sort of fit, with no cause. Let's call Tom's wife Clara. She became increasingly more panicked as she called an ambulance to come and take him to the hospital. Their 2 children, Bob and Wendy, rushed in from their beds when they heard the panic to find Tom lying unconscious on the bed. In Tom's eyes, as he was unconscious, there was a blur, and then a flash, and he awoke to find his eyesight coming back into focus as he sat up to find himself lying not next to Clara in 2022, but in his childhood bedroom from when he was 5 years old. As he rubbed his eyes, he noticed his hands had suddenly got smaller, the size of a child's. "What's going on?" he asked himself, but in a high-pitched little squeak like his childhood voice. The door knocked and a young woman entered, kissed him good morning, and opened his curtains. This young woman had sandy blonde hair and emerald green eyes, and was wearing a sequin dress. "Are you all right, baby?" she asked as she noticed the confused expression on his face. At that moment, a young man entered the room. He had dark brown hair, brown eyes, and wore round glasses, and was wearing an athletics kit. "Is everything okay, Angie dear?" he asked. I'm not sure, Tim. Tommy has woken up looking all confused this morning, replied Angie. Upon learning this young couple's names were Angie and Tim, and they called him Tommy, Tom realized with a jolt that the young couple standing in the doorway were his parents, and this was actually his old bedroom when he was 5. So this meant he was suddenly 5 years old instead of 32. He could have fallen asleep as a 32-year-old. Sorry, how could he have fallen asleep as a 32-year-old, a married man with kids of his own, and suddenly wake up as a 5-year-old boy? His parents helped him get up and dressed, while he tried to explain that he went to bed at the age of 32 and woke up suddenly as a 5-year-old. Oh no, darling, that's impossible. You couldn't have travelled back 27 years and jumped back to being a child. You're 5, and will be until your next birthday, Angie told him gently. You have some imagination, son, said Tim. As they entered the kitchen for breakfast, Tom glanced at the wall calendar to discover it was now 1995 instead of 2022. He was shocked by this revelation and even more convinced of his backwards leap in time. But Angie and Tim, were getting fed up with his stories about it, telling him, "That's enough," firmly each time he brought it up. After a couple of hours, they put him down for a nap, thinking it would calm him down. His protests were ignored, as he was lulled to sleep by Angie, singing him his favourite nursery rhyme, and he was out like a light. Seconds later came another flash in his eyes, and he woke screaming in a baby's cot. Now unable to speak, he'd gone to sleep as a 5-year-old, and this time he'd woken up as a baby. An even younger Angie entered and approached the cot. "It's all right, baby. Mummy's here," she crooned as she lifted him out of the cot and took him over to the changing table to change his nappy. "Almost done, sweetie," she said sweetly. She cleaned him up and dressed him before taking him downstairs, and he'd fallen asleep. He was awake again by the time they reached the lounge, when an even younger Tim took over from her and fed him a bottle of powdered milk. As he chugged the milk, he fell asleep again, and they thought he was cute. As he slept, he saw a third flash and woke up to find himself wearing a police uniform and driving a patrol car in hot pursuit of a stolen vehicle. He radioed the other units to order them to join the chase. He glanced down at his chest to discover he held the rank of chief and was now in charge of his department. He realized he'd gone asleep in his father's arms as a baby in 1990 and woken up as a 45-year-old police chief in 2035, as the date on his car's clock told him. He could hardly let it bother him now, as he was in hot pursuit of a stolen vehicle. This was the third time this had happened to him. He soon caught and arrested the car thief, with the help of his deputy, a young female officer named Ellie Jones. "Take the scumbag away and charge him," he ordered her, after thanking her. When he arrived home that evening, Clara ran into his arms and hugged him tightly with pride. As they sat down to dinner, they talked as a family, but he didn't bring the subject of his time-leaping adventures into conversation. Bob then mentioned the fact he loved it when he talked about that, as did Wendy, despite being 15 and 17 now. They didn't think he was mad, but believed him about it and thought they knew why he was living his life out of sequence. Even Clara thought there was some reason for it, but they didn't discuss it around anyone else. What a family, he sighed, with an aura of thankfulness for their support. But why does it only ever occur when you're sleeping? She asked. I wish I knew, honey, but I don't, I'm afraid, he replied. He started to feel drowsy and conked out at the table. After experiencing the flash a fourth time, he woke up to find himself back in bed with Clara 1 year into their engagement. That much was evident by the fact he looked in the mirror to find a young man of around 21 staring back at him, and a 19-year-old young woman answering to the name Clara Bandowitz standing behind him in the bathroom. He checked the date on his phone to learn it was the 8th of July 2016 instead of 2035. Like it had been mere seconds earlier. He now realized he was living his life completely out of sequence, but still had no idea why. They finished getting up and ready and went down to breakfast. The post came and he received a letter inviting him to join the Coles Grove Police Academy, and he was ecstatic to be going into police training. Clara was excited for him too, as this was what he wanted to do with his life. Would this ever end for him? Living his life completely out of sequence, with no known cause? As he was out for his evening walk, he started to feel the sensation a fifth time, and saw a flash without falling asleep. First, until he reached the other side of the road. He collapsed on the curb and regained consciousness in a hospital bed. He looked in a handheld mirror to find an elderly man with pure white hair staring back at him. He glanced up at the floating wall calendar to learn it was now the middle of October 2078. Oh, my word, he coughed weakly. He had fallen unconscious in 2016 and woken as an 88-year-old man on his deathbed. He looked beside to find his now 58-year-old son, Bob, who was now the commissioner of the Coles Grove Police. He'd taken time off work to be there with him. Wendy arrived from the university campus, where she was a professor in the science department, to be with him too. The machine flatlined, and he saw a sick flash and woke up alive and well and in full health. He was sitting in his office at the police station, examining his appearance. He now had silvery grey hair and crow's feet around his eyes. He wore a navy uniform and still held the rank of chief. It was now the summer of 2053. He was 63 and had received several awards over his long service to the force and to the public. He was summoned to a board meeting at the headquarters, where he was promoted to commissioner, and he graciously accepted. He was proud to have made it all the way to this point in his career. He also knew he'd be retiring in a few years, but took to his new job like a criminal takes to his crimes. When he told Clara, Bob, and Wendy, they were so proud they threw him a party to celebrate. It's like being 21 again, he said gratefully. And that was out of sequence. I hope you enjoyed it. There will be another one of these anthology type stories coming your way soon. But until then, the next episode of this will be in a different category. And until that episode occurs, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a Semajical time. Hey guys, and welcome to the second story, or the second Midhampton tale. This time we are taking a look into the future. Now, the story is called Lizzie and Shelby, and content warning, it contains strong language. Viewer discretion from here on out is advised. Midhampton, 2039. Lizzie and Shelby were the two young daughters of Lily Barrett, and two different fathers. Lizzie was small with jet black hair and green eyes, with a bow in her hair, and wore a bubblegum pink t-shirt and bright lilac skirt with matching shoes. Shelby was small with blonde hair and blue eyes, with a band in her hair. She wore a bright blue dress with matching blouse and shoes. They were both under 5, with Lizzie being 4 and Shelby being 3, and they were both alike in behaviour. By this I mean to tell you they were both very naughty little girls, who never did as they were told, and spoke very rudely to anyone who crossed their path. Their rudeness even extended to Lily's current boyfriend Mike Farrier, who took their attitude with great patience and care, helping her to discipline them. It was a brilliant midsummer's day, and they had taken the girls to the play dips at the other end of town. They were all having fun in the ball pool, frolicking, having a ball war with each other. As Lizzie stepped out for a rest break to go and use the facility, Lily went to take her to do this, while Mike gave Shelby a drink and a snack, leaving some out for Lizzie as well. When Lily and Lizzie returned, Lizzie sat down to have her snack and drink. Lily and Mike had theirs as well, and they all chatted as they ate. Lizzie started flicking chocolate pebbles at Shelby, so Mike confiscated them. "Lizzie, please don't flick food at your sister," he said nicely. "Give those back, Stinky Mikey!" Lizzie replied rudely. This led to Lily taking her to a corner and placing her in time-out for 4 minutes. When she came to release her, she got her to apologize for her behavior and allowed her to join them in their fun. "Fucking idiot, Lizzie," said Shelby. This gobsmacked everyone in the building, and mortifying Lily to hear her little girl using such language. Even Lizzie couldn't believe what Shelby just said to her, seeing more trouble was about to brew. Lily and Mike rushed them to the car and drove away from the play dips. Lizzie was now hitting Shelby out of feeling hurt by what Shelby just called her. "Bitch!" said Shelby as she did this, causing Mike to slam on the brakes very near to home in the car park of a service station.
Shelby keeps swearing at me,
cried Lizzie. Lily got out of the front passenger seat, came round to Shelby's seat, opened the door and smacked her. Shelby, that language is highly inappropriate and you are very naughty to use it. When we get home, we are going to have a little talk about this, she scolded before getting her to apologize to Lizzie, who was still crying. Lizzie, sweetheart, I promise you Shelby hasn't got away with this. Please try to calm yourself down and keep your hands in your lap, she assured her.
Yes, Mum,
replied Lizzie. Good girl, said Lily as she rubbed her head before returning to her seat, and they continued on their way home. Once they were in the front door, Lizzie went to play in her room, while Mike and Lily sat Shelby down to talk about the language she'd been using. All we need to know now is where you learned the language in the first place, so we can sort this out, said Lily. Lizzie entered as Shelby was telling them where she and Lizzie, had learned to swear. Mike looked over at Lizzie. Is that true, love? Was it two careless boys shouting swears at the top of their lungs? He asked her.
Yes, Mike, it's all true,
she confirmed. Shelby approached Lizzie and hugged her.
I'm sorry, Lizzie,
she said nicely.
I forgive you, Shelby. I couldn't stay mad at you forever. You're my sister and I love you,
replied Lizzie.
I love you too,
replied Shelby. Lily felt tears welling in her eyes. You two are a pair of sweethearts. Look at you being loving to each other, she said.
Mummy, just because we fight sometimes doesn't mean we love each other any less,
Shelby told her. Of course it doesn't, baby. Your sisters shall always love each other, replied Lily. This meant both girls were forgiven their bad behaviour and given another chance to be good.
Will you only love us if we're good?
asked Shelby. I'll always love you, darling. We all will, replied Lily. No matter what happens, said Mike.
Why would you ask such a silly question?
asked Lizzie. From that moment on, both girls became more respectful of everyone around, and were better people, despite being little children. So that was the second of the Midhampton Tales and the first one to see into the future. Cast your eyes into the future. I couldn't resist. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching and have a Semajical time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Semajical Story Time, the show where I share stories that I have written. So, we return to the Fairyland Tales for the 10th installment in that series. And now you're going to hear the backstory of how the council era started. The first council, A Fairyland Tale. by me. This is the earliest story of the modern fairyland history, as it tells of the formation and operations of the first council, the beginning of the council era. It was a time of prosperity in fairyland, as the fairies had not long ago won the war with the sprites, the race of magical mischief makers that they once shared their home world with, but not harmoniously, and as such, they thought it was time they had laws to live by. A group of well-educated middle-aged fairies agreed with the population and held a meeting to discuss forming a council to help pass and enforce laws, starting off a new calendar for a new era of fairyland history. The head fairy led the meeting and proposed the idea for the fairy council, which every fairy at the meeting agreed to. It was then proposed that there should be officers that enforce laws for everything, including compulsory education for their species, to follow in their most sacred law. For millennia, there had been no laws or government to enforce them, so they could go out into the human world and have offspring with them. It was decided that the most important law should make it illegal for fairies to sire children with humans. So one fairy stood up to suggest a task force should be set up to help them enforce their laws, and going out and siring offspring with humans should be one to warrant capital punishment for those who break it, betraying their government. The notion was passed, and they set up an academy to train cadets to become agents. Ryrie, the fairy with all the knowledge of law and its ins and outs, volunteered his input. He was elected to be in charge of the offices of fairy law enforcement, which he was only too happy to accept. He'd already trained a force of officers and agents to work for him in the department. He appointed over 1,000 of them to be his agents in the task force, and the remaining 800 as officers and teachers at the Fairy Code Task Force Academy, the school that was set up to train new recruits. Within the next several hours, they set up officers to enforce laws for compulsory education and the legal age at which it should begin and be completed. They already had schools in Fairyland, but no set age to start and end. For the start and end of compulsory school age for young fairies in training. So Sparky, the fairy who knew about education, offered his input and suggested that 74 should be the school admittance and starting age, and 345 should be the school graduation age, and elected him as their first minister for education, which he graciously accepted the job and appointed all his employees and hired new teachers to the schools. Once all the offices were full, ministers elected and employees helping to run them, it was time to elect a prime fairy minister to serve the first term. It was decided during the meeting that every PFM should be in office for a century, and then the whole council would reshuffle at election time, at which point a new PFM was to be chosen and reshuffle their officers as they pleased. So the two top fairies stood to run for PFM, sending out ballots for fairies who were 512 or older to vote on. It was agreed with the Ophel that 512 should be considered the legal age of majority for members of their species, and any fairy who celebrates their 512th birthday should report to the council officers to receive the twinkling, a fairy's rite of passage into adulthood, and be considered for a council mission in the human world. The two top fairies running for PFM were Comet and Astro, but the favourite was Comet, so he was elected into office as the first PFM, and things were finally in order for the first time. It was also a capital offence for any fairy old enough to vote not to do so, and it would result in their arrest and them receiving the death penalty. It was now the year 1 of a new era, as they now had a full government in Fairyland, and passing and enforcing laws for them to live and abide by, and they couldn't be happier. They knew there would be some who would challenge the laws and try to rebel against them. There were still some sprites left from the war who had since reformed and joined offices in the Fairy Council, but in the lowest departments, which were maintenance and cleaning the main building as well as the other offices. This might cause a rebellion if they weren't given better jobs in the council. The Fairy Code Task Force didn't think it was a good idea to trust them in any higher offices, as they wouldn't take the responsibilities seriously. As the sprites were the last of an ancient race who lived in a lawless world, where they could do as they pleased, this was considered a form of racism. Their ways had come to an end after hundreds of thousands of years, and now the last of their kind was relegated to janitorial labor, and they didn't like it. So demanded to be treated like every fairy else. Over the next century, the Fairy Council ruled the land with iron fists and passed lots of laws that served to keep sprites from rising through their ranks, knowing they could have a full uprising from their janitors and cleaners. After 50 years of treating them like this, their Minister of Public Fairy Relations held a meeting to discuss what they were doing to sprites, as he'd recently visited them in their department and seen how unhappy they were, and invited them to this meeting so they sent a representative to the meeting to have a say on their behalf. He made sure they were heard and agreed to a trial run of promotions for the sprites once he'd heard how they'd been educating themselves in all the laws and customs of Fairyland. As a result of this meeting, all the sprites were interviewed by all the department heads and hired by them to work in their offices. This trial lasted 2 years, and the Fairy Council knew they could trust them to work in every office of the council, including the FCTF and the ministries, and they were all much happier because of it. They'd managed to avoid a sprite uprising, and it was all thanks to their MPFR, Ganymede, whose job it was to sort things like this out. 49 more years after that, it was nearly time to reshuffle the council for the first time. Ganymede was shocked to learn that the sprites he'd helped nearly half a century earlier, had put him into the running for second PFM, and agreed to run for office. His opponent was an up-and-comer in the council named Fizzler Dazzler, who had just joined the council. Over the next year, the two candidates ran fiercely against each other. After 11 months, the results were in, and Ganymede was elected in as Fairyland's second PFM. And the era of the Second Council was set to begin after 100 years of peace and prosperity. All the offices were reshuffled and new heads were appointed to the departments. The first council era had been a success. As the new leader, PFM Ganymede took office and assumed the role. Fairyland era, 1C, Y1C to Y100, 1st century. PFM, comment. Reformation, sprites being given better jobs, 50 CE. First reshuffle, 100 CE. Successor, Ganymede. Second Prime Fairy Minister. And that was story number 10, which is also chronologically the first of the mainline stories. I hope you enjoyed the backstory of how the council era started. And I hope you enjoyed this video, because if you did, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Until the next episode of this show, thanks for watching and have a Semajical time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Semajical Story Time, the show where I read you stories that I've written. And right now we're returning to the Tales from Animalia category for the 7th written overall story, but the 3rd in chronological order. This is Genesis 3, The Royal Test of Worthiness. Here we go. Over 3,000 years have passed since the nations of Animalia were established, and the land's current king, Topher IV, was retiring after having ruled the land for 78 years. And as he'd not fathered an heir, he had to choose his successor. This was the 5th time a retiring monarch had to choose their successor because they had no biological child to succeed them to the throne. He had a list of over 50 candidates who were hoping to be chosen as the next king or queen of the land. So he summoned them to the palace for a briefing. In order to be chosen as the next monarch of Animalia, a citizen had to be worthy of the throne. The royal test of worthiness was very important for commoners who were shortlisted to succeed the retiring monarch. He addressed them all. Welcome, candidates, to the royal test of worthiness. As your king, I am retiring from my rule over Animalia. However, due to never having married or fathered an heir or heiress to the throne, I am required to select a worthy candidate to replace me as your king or queen. In the end, only one of you 50 candidates will be deemed a worthy successor and crowned king or queen of Animalia. he told them. Just as he was setting up the first task of the test, an assassin tried to shoot him, but one of the candidates, a young lion named Leon Grayson, threw himself in front of King Topher, taking the bullet for him. After seeing that, the remaining 49 candidates saw no point in competing for the throne and withdrew. After 3 days in the royal infirmary, Leon was summoned to the throne room by the retiring king. He stood down and handed over his royal robes. Leon ascended to the throne. Topher then read him through the royal pledge of allegiance and the royal promise to be a good leader in combat and a good reigning monarch. After swearing to all those things, he was crowned King Leon the First of his name, having fulfilled his final duty as the now retired monarch. King Leon acted on his first duty by officially awarding Topher for his 78-year reign over the land and relieving him of his rule. He then ordered for the arrest of the would-be assassin who tried to kill the former King Topher, as he was retiring, and sentenced him to permanent exile to somewhere else in the known world outside Animalia. This would mean the secrets of Animalia would be stripped from him, and he'd become another ordinary wolf that walks on all fours and growls instead of actually talking. This was agreed upon as a great first decision he could have made as the new king of Animalia. Within 3 years of his reign, King Leon married his childhood sweetheart, young lioness Rosie Hammond, making her Queen Rosie, the 6th of her name, as there had already been 5 queens named Rosie. They were so happy together as husband and wife, and fathered a son named Leo, Prince of Primary. This meant it was Leon's duty as his father to train him to be king himself one day, when he was old enough. And so that was the royal test of worthiness. Now, with Halloween coming up, guys, the next few installments will be the trilogy I've done of... Yeah, that's right. Things that go bump in the night. With the first of those trilogies, or anthology story collections, Things that go bump in the night being the next episode. So look out for that one. But until then, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have a Semajical time. Hey guys, and welcome to the first of count them, three Halloween specials for Semajical Story Time. And I'm going to read my own horror series, Things That Go Bump in the Night. Start with the original trilogy of stories that kicked it all off. So, here we go. Viewer beware, you may be in for a scare. Let's get the first story on the way, shall we? It all started on a cold, dark October night, and everybody on Watcher Street was fast asleep but young Matthew Brodgers was an insomniac and had a sleepwalking problem and often wandered about the streets and did things he wouldn't normally do while he was awake, such as stealing, stalking, kidnapping, and indeed all kinds of unusual things. All this would normally happen at the stroke of midnight and last until the crack of dawn, by which time he'd make it home and be found asleep on the porch. The clock struck midnight, and out came a zombified, sleepwalking Matthew, sloppily dressed in a black coat and dark blue slippers, and brandishing a knife. And as it was the middle of the night, no CCTV camera could pick him up, leaving him to go stalking around like a zombie, groaning like one before falling silent so nobody could hear him. He soon stalked over to a young woman whose boyfriend was dropping her off without warning, and without warning put the knife right through her chest, causing her to drop dead, unknowingly becoming a murderer in the process. He then slumped into the car, took the seatbelt and wrapped it around, choking him slowly, putting the knife in his chest, unknowingly committing his second murder, before slowly rising and swaying off up the road. As he made his way unknowingly into a park where a neighbor was walking his dog and accidentally snapping a photo of him with his phone's camera, rather than waking him or scaring him, it just made him more sleepy. So he just kept staggering around, killing innocent people, but he didn't realize he was doing any of it because he was sleepwalking. He soon came out on the other side of the neighborhood, where his cousin Alice saw him and became worried about him, but he just sleepwalked past her and approached the woods, where he staggered into a hidden serial killer and unknowingly stabbed him right through the top of the head, pulling his brains out on the blade of his knife. As he came out of the woods, the sun was starting to come up, and he slowly staggered his way home, while cleaning his knife on his coat. He soon arrived at his front door. He let himself into the porch and the main front door, took off his coat, went to put the knife back, and then went in the living room and collapsed on the sofa. Next morning, a series of mysterious murders was reported on the news that was believed to have been committed by a mysterious man who might have done it out of fright. As he went about his usual daily business, when his best friend Molly Skinner came to talk to him about the murders and commented on how strange it was that they didn't report that one of the murders committed was that of an unknown serial killer who had hidden out in the woods. They even missed out what the murderer looked like, she told him. How could anyone tell what he looked like? The murders took place in the middle of last night while we were asleep, he replied. She was freaked out. How do you know that? She asked. Apparently, the killer was wearing a coat and was hooded as well as shrouded in darkness, he told her. Were you out at the time? She asked. I was out for a late night walk, he told her. Molly looked at him, and then it clicked. Did you have another sleepwalking episode last night? She asked. I can't remember, Moll, he told her honestly. I'm asking because some people who weren't murdered reported seeing a young hooded man in a black overcoat staggering around like he was sleepwalking. The scary thing is he was carrying a bloody knife. Matt, one of the reporters was your cousin Alice, Molly told him. That was nice of him to spare my cousin, said Matthew, with relief. That's when it dawned on Molly that Matt himself was the mysterious murderer. As he was sleepwalking, he didn't realize he was doing it. Alice was Alice was worried about you, Matt. Only you would spare your own family, she told him. The police arrived to question them about it, and he confessed to the murders, but they didn't arrest him, as they were aware of his sleepwalking problem, and he knew it must have been one of his episodes of that. I wish I had known I was killing that serial killer in the woods, he said out of annoyance. Olivia James was a beautiful young woman who lived in a shared apartment with her boyfriend Max Tyler. Ever since she was little, she had been deathly afraid of spiders and had their webs knocked down every time she saw one. Every time she did this, instead of asking someone to come and get rid of the spider in question, it was because of this. Her older brother always warned her about cruelty to the spiders, and one day they might catch her in a web and eat her instead. While scared of that should be to death, while scared to death, not of death, that this would happen, she still got whoever she was with to knock down every web she saw. Even Max kept trying to reassure her that house spiders don't capture people. They capture insects, but little did he know he was wrong about this, as that night an army of spiders set to work spinning a web so strong it could catch a human right in the center of their room. When Olivia got up to go to the bathroom, she walked right into it, and sure enough, she was caught in a spider's web and began to scream for help, which woke up Max, who snapped on the light to find her wrapped in a massive spider's web in the middle of the room. with her open mouth covered with more web. He jumped up and tried to free her, but he ended up getting caught too, and all before dawn they were eaten by the spiders. Next morning their neighbor came to check on them and found them dead in the center of a very thick spider's web. As the spiders advanced on him, he armed himself with a swatter and whacked them to death. And as he killed each spider, that spider's section of the web weakened until it was nothing but a normal torn down web, with his dead neighbors underneath it. He cleared it up and had their bodies removed by the coroners, who took his report, and to his shock he learned that spiders everywhere were catching all of Olivia's friends in webs and killing them for knocking down the webs of their relations as some form of revenge on them. The coroners left with Olivia and Max's bodies and took them to the morgue. Later that day, as Tim made his usual rounds, he found himself under attack by spiders, and as he was unarmed, he couldn't defend himself, so he was carried off by the spiders and thrown into the middle of yet another web, which they wrapped him in so tightly it cut off his airways, killing him instantly, and they ate him on the spot. Alex Furlong was a young man who loved horror films and supernatural phenomena. He loved it all so much he wished he had supernatural powers, as he was tired of being too normal. One stormy night, as he was taking his evening stroll, when he was struck by a really powerful bolt of lightning, and as it flashed in his eyes, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. He soon dropped onto his back as the storm passed him by. "That was some storm," he said as he got to his feet, and walked on down the street. As he walked through his front door, his eyes clouded over, and he had a vision of himself dying in a bus crash the next morning. As he fell to the floor, his eyes returned to normal. "I am not getting on any buses tomorrow," he told himself, as he saw the flash of the route number in his eyes. "No buses or Route 13s either," he said firmly, as he realized just what he just saw was a premonition. The next morning, he decided to walk into town instead of getting the number 13 bus. As he started to walk down the street, he saw the number 13 bus stop at the end of his road, but he let it go without him. About an hour later, as he emerged from a pound shop in town, he saw the number 13 bus pulling out of the bus stop and collide head-on with another bus, killing everyone on board. He felt bad for all the families who had lost loved ones in that bus crash, but he couldn't help freaking out over his premonition coming true, save for him because he was not on that bus. 2 weeks later, while he was at college, he was having lunch in the main cafeteria with a group of friends. When he glanced over at the kitchen, he stood up, his eyes clouded over. As he stood up, his eyes clouded over, and he saw a scene in the same kitchen, 3 weeks from that point, in which a fire broke out, burning down the whole college and killing everyone inside. As his eyes returned back to normal, he felt unsteady and panicky, and dropped his tray on the floor. Alex, mate, are you okay? You look freaked out, said his friend Raphael. No, Raphael, I'm not okay. And nor will we be in 3 weeks, any of us, he told him. What are you talking about? Asked his friend, Myrtle. Everyone listen to me, this is a matter of life and death. In 3 weeks, the kitchen's going to catch fire and burn this place to the ground, and we're all going to die, he told the whole cafeteria in his panic. How do you know this? Asked Raphael. I just had a premonition of it happening, replied Alex. Everyone thought he was crazy, despite how freaked out he was, all except his friends Raphael and Myrtle, who were now freaked out too, and went with him to see the counselor, who was concerned about their friend's mental health. Alex, what's happened to you? She asked nicely. I was caught in that storm a few nights ago. It did something to me. I had a premonition that same night about a number 13 bus crashing. I was supposed to be on that bus. But the next morning I walked to town instead of catching that bus. And the freaky thing is, the bus crashed, killing everyone on board, he told her. After the session, the three friends went home, deciding between them not to turn up in 3 weeks' time. 3 weeks later, a report confirming Alex's premonition appeared on the morning news. The college had indeed burned down in a freak fire, killing everyone in attendance, except 3 students. The front door knocked, and he went to let in Raphael and Myrtle, who noticed that he was watching the news report about the tragedy. This was the second disaster to happen in 3 weeks, and he'd survived both of them, only this time he'd saved his best friends as well. They all felt really bad for all the families who had lost loved ones in that fire. A few days later, things calmed down, and the newly rebuilt college had welcomed back its 3 oldest students, as well as lots of new ones, and Alex became a celebrity among them all because of his precognitive ability, which he knew was there because of both a freak storm and a wish he'd made that same night. He didn't want anyone to know that part of the story. Oops. Forget what I just told you. And that is it, guys, for this first trilogy of spooky tales. Now, don't worry, because none of the stories are true. I made them up, okay? They're just works of fiction like every other story you've heard in this series, including the ones that were supposedly based on my own life. I exaggerated those to make them more fun for you to hear. Okay. Okay. So, guys, that means next episode we'll be doing the second of these trilogies of stories, More Things That Go Bump in the Night. Until then, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have us a magical time. Okay, guys, now what you've just heard in all of these stories are just pure works of fiction. None of them are true stories, and this is just being done in aid of Halloween, which by the time you're seeing this will be tomorrow, and the third and final one of these compilation stories will be told to you then. So, until then, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have us a magical time. Robin Dempsey and his girlfriend Kelly Manning were avid horror fans, as they made sure all their friends, families, and followers knew on Twitter. So they were obsessed with everything to do with the genre, paying special attention to slasher films, and were making homemade horror films with a total of more than 60 to date. They were on Twitter one day when they came across a hashtag that they knew shouldn't be there, but they looked at it anyway. It was a murder game in which they had to hashtag the word kill alongside the name of the person they wanted to kill. Otherwise, it would be them who would be murdered very violently. Thinking it was a sick joke briefly, before realizing it was actually deadly blackmail, they looked through everyone who had taken part in it and who they'd had killed. "Those sick bastards deserve to die," said Robin. So he did hashtags with the names of the runners of the Twitter account, and then sat back and waited to hear the news. The next morning, the news of the brutal murders of Jordan Smith, Anthony Dreyer, and Stephen Blaster were headline news in all the papers. This was followed by the news of the R word committed by David Bremen. So Kelly picked up her iPad and put hashtag kill David Brennan into the tweet and stated she wanted him to be impaled by a spike fence. That afternoon, David Bremen was working on a skyscraper when he fell off the scaffolding onto the spike of a fence railing below, dying by impaling. Instantly after seeing the report about it on the evening news, they were bombarded with tweets letting them know about how the sick bastard had died by impaling. They replied saying, "That sick bastard deserved to die," and everyone agreed. They found it strange how this account could still be active despite its founders were dead. They looked at the handler to discover that they were now running the account. This shocked them to learn it was now their account. "How the hell does the account just pass on to whoever was the last to use this hashtag?" asked Robin. Kelly took a closer look at the rules of the account, set by its original creators, and learned that it was cursed to pass on to anyone who should use the hashtag more than once, and kill us on their first visit. So, as they stumbled across the hashtag and used it to kill the original creators of the account, it was now theirs. Wanting to know how the account became cursed in the first place, they decided to look into it, and this is what they found out. The Twitter account Death by Hashtag was created by a trio of Satanists who found it highly amusing to go online creating accounts to taunt people with posts and hashtags designed to turn the innocent into murderers. Being Satanists meant they had the ability to curse everyone and everything, so they used their unholy scriptures to curse all of their social media accounts, to force themselves onto whoever visited any one of them to use it to kill them. The curse used on all of these accounts is Allah Hala Dominus Rectus Sectus, Lord Satan. We ask thee, curse all our social media accounts. So whosoever should use any one of them to hunt and kill us, their creators, shall be forced to run them. They were sickened to learn this and refused to use any of them to kill anyone else, so made a blank kill hashtag on their final tweet and waited for the brutal deaths that awaited them. That night, as they were going to bed, Robin's body erupted into flames and spontaneously combusted, while Kelly sprouted mysterious, angry red boils, which burst out into foul-smelling pus, and she exploded on the spot, with no one to force themselves onto. All the social media accounts were deleted from all internet servers. Jonathan Turner and his friends Mandy Davies and Peter Tyler loved Halloween, despite all of them being 21 years old, in university and sharing an apartment on the third floor of their 7th-floor megaplex building just down the road from the university campus where they studied. They loved everything about Halloween, from serving the youngsters who came trick-or-treating to playing supernatural games to see if the urban myths surrounding them were true. And to their horror, each one they played did do what it said it did. Peter brought out the Halloween games box they kept for the occasion every year to see which game they'd be trying this year. Last year, it was the Daruma-san, or the bath game, in which they each had to take baths at midnight in the dark whilst chanting Daruma-san fell down, which did indeed summon the vengeful spirit, which they all had to fight off together in order to be rid of it. It was Jonathan who summoned her on his turn, and Mandy who yelled "Kata!" to get rid of her. And the year before that, they tried their hands at playing Ouija to disastrous results, as they ended up summoning the spirit of Ted Bundy to our realm, and he tried all he could to kill them, failing at every attempt, only injuring them constantly until they decided to banish him back to hell by ending the game by saying goodbye. This year was her turn to draw out the game, so she closed her eyes and rummaged through the box before drawing out a piece of paper and unfolding it to reveal their game. This year was to be Elevator to Another World. Knowing all the rules, they drove into town to use the elevators at the Mega Shopper Mall, which had 30 floors, which meant they had at least 6 elevators. Before we continue, here are the rules for this game. 1. Press the 4th floor. Do not proceed if someone else enters the elevator or one player leaves the elevator. If someone does that, start from the beginning. 2. Press the 2nd floor. Do not proceed if someone else enters the elevator or one player leaves the elevator. If someone does that, start from the beginning. 3. Press the 6th floor. Do not proceed if someone else enters the elevator or one player leaves the elevator. If someone does that, start from the beginning. 4. Back to the 2nd floor. Do not proceed if someone else enters the elevator or one player leaves the elevator. If someone does that, start from the beginning. 5. Press the 10th floor. Do not proceed if someone else enters the elevator or one player leaves the elevator. If someone does that, start from the beginning. 6. Press the 5th floor. Do not proceed if someone enters the elevator or one player leaves the elevator. If someone does that, start from the beginning. 7. If a woman enters the elevator at the 5th floor, do not look at her, do not speak, and do not talk to her. Otherwise, she will claim you for her own. She is not human. 8. Press the 1st floor. Do not proceed if someone else enters the elevator or one player leaves the elevator. If someone does that, start from the beginning. 9. If the elevator reaches the 10th floor, leave and do not respond to the woman when she asks, "Where are you going?" or "What's wrong?" Her voice will be high if you do that. Do not proceed if someone enters the elevator or one player leaves the elevator. If someone does that, start again. You are in the other world. 1. If you're alone, you're in the other world. 2. Electronics will not work. 3. It is the same as our world, except all the lights are off, and the only thing you'll be able to see out the window is a red cross off in the distance. To return to our world, use the same elevator and punch in the same sequence as before, 246210-5. This is only if you are on the 10th floor. When you reach the 5th floor, the elevator will again begin to ascend to the 10th floor. You must press the button to cancel the ascension. You use to cancel the ascension before it reaches the 10th floor. After you reach the floor, you must check your surroundings carefully. If you notice something is off, even the smallest detail, do not exit the elevator. If you detect something wrong, repeat step 2 until your surroundings look as they should. Once you are confident you have returned to your own world, you may safely exit the elevator. With these things in mind, the friends entered the mall and entered an elevator, following every instruction perfectly until they got to the 5th floor, and the woman entered. Jonathan ignored her, but Peter and Mandy both looked at and spoke to her, so she took them for her own. Jonathan was now alone in the elevator with the woman, but still ignored her. The elevator reached the 10th floor, and he stood there. "What's wrong?" asked the woman, but he just exited without even acknowledging her. "Where are you going?" She called to him, but he still paid her no attention. He was standing alone in a dark room. He went to check his phone, but it had died completely. "What's going on here?" he asked, scared to death. He looked out the window and saw a red cross in the distance. He'd reached the other world and felt goosebumps with each step he took. He decided to try and make the return journey, following all the same instructions on how to do it. Once he'd reached the first floor, he did not leave the elevator, as he noticed a crowd of hooded figures in black robes floating around, so he repeated the second step of the instructions until he finally saw nothing unfamiliar to him and safely exited the elevator. This was the world he left, except he no longer had his two friends. He wondered where they were. Then it hit him, and he was cross with them. "Those fucking morons!" he yelled at the top of his lungs. The police took him into questioning 6 times about their disappearance, and each time he told the same story, so they arrested him for murdering Amanda Jane Davies and Peter Ashley Tyler. In a matter of 3 weeks, he was expelled from his university, and his long stint in police custody began. He was put on trial 2 years from that date, and wanting it to be over quickly, the jury found him guilty of murdering his 2 best friends, and he was sentenced to serve 2 consecutive life terms in prison, back to back, and he was carted off to serve his double life sentence in Hell Pit's Maximum Security Correctional Center. He was to serve his sentence without parole. Three in the morning is not a time to be messing around, as it's the start of the witching hour. So really you do not want to be messing about between the hours of 3 and 4 in the morning. Let me tell you why with this cautionary tale about our main character, one Lorna Donovan, 13 years old and never goes to bed until hours after her scheduled time of 9:30 at night. It was Tuesday night, and she was still up and about as usual, trying not to get caught out of bed after hours. It was actually 2:55 on Wednesday morning, and she was going to do something really stupid in less than 5 minutes, as 4 minutes had already passed. At 3 o'clock on the dot, she started her rebellious but very silly game by placing mirrors in front of and behind the chair in the living room, with a fan behind the chair and a bowl of cold water in front of the chair, before sitting down on the chair and with a lighted candle in her hands. She closed her eyes and chanted in ancient tongues. As she opened her eyes, her candle blew out, plunging her into total darkness. As she looked around in total fear of what was coming. "Hello?" she called through chattering teeth. Silence for 3 whole minutes before she jumped at the sight of a shadowy figure entering the room, with outstretched hands ready to take her. The figure was now right in front of her. She leapt off the chair and made a beeline for the front door in complete fear for her life, which was about to be taken by this entity unless she could get help. As the figure reached the front door, she screamed a very quiet, inaudible scream, as she couldn't breathe in the presence of this apparition. "Why did I even start this stupid game?" she thought as the entity made a grab for her, but she managed to duck out of its way. But it was still hot on her heel, every move she made. In time, she made it back to the living room, where she started the whole stupidity. She glanced at the wall clock. It was nearly 4 o'clock, so she pulled out her crucifix necklace and shoved it in the apparition's face. As she did this, she gained her breath back and shouted in ancient tongues the exorcism prayer, banishing the apparition from the house before collapsing face first into the bowl of water. She woke up a short while later in bed, with her family standing around her looking worried. It was her father who made the first move. "Are you okay, honey?" he asked, placing an arm round her for comfort. She twitched with nerves and burst into tears of apology for what she'd done. And there you have it, the reason why you should not get up and mess with demonic entities or spirits during the witching hour. Lorna Donovan learned that the hard way, and I'm certain that after all that, she will never do that ever again. Mwahaha! Hello guys, and welcome back to Semajical Story Time for the 78th overall episode of the show, and the second of the 3 Halloween specials I'm doing this year, and more things that go bump in the night. So without further ado, let's get on with the story, shall we? With the first story in this trilogy being Hey guys, James here, and welcome to another episode of Some Magical Story Time, where it's time for the third and final Halloween special of the year. Even more things that go bump in the night. The third trilogy of stories that I wrote in years past that I'm bringing back to life here. So, let's get on with the seventh story in the overall collection, shall we? Frankie McDougal had just moved into a new house in order to start a new life in the quiet of a small town. He'd just finished his evening meal of cottage pie and a half pint of lager, and decided to go for an evening walk to burn off the pounds. He put on his trainers, and out he went into the cool night air for his walk around the neighborhood. As he passed his kind elderly neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Northman, he gave them a friendly wave. Just as he came off his street and onto the avenue, he bumped into his young teenage neighbor, Summer Jackson, and stopped upon seeing the worried look on her face. "What's the matter, Summer?" he asked. "I'd turn back if I were you, Frankie," she told him, panicked. "How come?" asked Frankie. "There's this freakishly tall, thin man in the area who just stands around, smiling at people," she told him, her panic rising. So, I might need to reread that. "There's this freakishly tall man in the area who just stands around smiling at people," she told him, her panic rising. Frankie gave her a hug to try and calm her down, peering over her shoulder to see the freakishly tall, thin shadow appearing around the corner, and just stopped there. As they parted, he shone his torch at the shadow to reveal the owner of the shadow standing before them. A freakishly tall man, about 8 feet in height, and very thin, with a cartoonishly wide smile on his face. Summer leaned over and whispered, "That's him," into Frankie's ear. Frankie faced the man bravely with his hands on his hips. "Oi, you! What do you want with us?" he yelled at him. Realizing his mistake as the man sped up and ran towards them, causing them to leg it as fast as they could. No matter how fast they ran, the man caught up to them within seconds. They leapt behind a tall tree as he ran past them and watched him vanish as he came to a curb. "What was that thing?" asked Summer in surprise. "I'll fill you in on it while I walk you home," replied Frankie, as he took her by the hand and walked her carefully home. South Hamilton, a town I wish I could say was like every other town we know, but I can't. You see, more than a century ago, a huge fire swept through the town, burning down all the houses and buildings. Yes, buildings, okay. Killing all the inhabitants. Nowadays, nobody goes there unless it's to explore and learn about what happened. Or in the case of our main character, Leanna Sinclair, it was for a dare. She was 36 years old and just loved taking dares from her friends. On this occasion, she had accepted their dare to venture into South Hamilton and stay there for a week. So on Monday, she packed her suitcase, loaded her car, and drove into the now abandoned town for her own little holiday. As she passed the marker into the town, she got chills as she looked around at all the burnt and destroyed buildings. Looking ahead, she saw a large crater where the fire started, destroyed the town. As she parked up outside the old abandoned hotel, which had been burnt right down to the reception desk and a room on the ground floor, so she went in and made herself comfortable. The room was mostly intact, save for the wardrobe, which had been blown to pieces. How did this room manage to survive being burned down? She asked herself, as she unpacked her suitcase and hung her clothes in what was left of the wardrobe, and placed her underwear in the chest of drawers, which had also escaped being burnt or blown up. This made her feel a bit uneasy, but she stayed anyway. She was the only person in the town, and nobody outside the town knew she was even there, except for the friend who dared her to come and stay here for a week after she bragged that nothing could scare her. She went out into the town to see just how much damage that fire had caused a century ago. She was amazed at what she saw. The deeper she went into town, the more damage she saw, and the more scared she started to feel. "This is a ghost town," she whispered, as she entered what was left of an old general store, and took a bar of dusty chocolate, which miraculously enough was still solid, and still in date despite being a century old. As the week progressed, she started noticing little details that seemed too surreal to be true. She had managed to find a week's worth of food that was miraculously still good and edible, and plenty of water for hydration. By now it was Sunday, and she was on her final day in town, which happened to be the anniversary of the disaster and she was so scared she didn't feel she could complete the challenge. She had heard the legend of the ghost flames, which say that the ghost of the flames that destroyed the town comes sweeping through and traps any living person and then kills them. She did not believe a word of it until she exited the hotel with her bags packed ready to leave town and saw the flames coming straight at her, blowing up her car before it even reached her. She dropped her luggage and ran as fast as she could, turning transparent every step of the way, wondering what was going on. Why was she turning transparent? This made no sense. She was a living human being, not a ghost. As she ran to the town marker, she found herself trapped in the town. She turned to walk back towards the town to find a whole town of transparent people standing before her. "What's going on?" she asked. A transparent man stepped forward. "You're dead, sweetie," he told her. This was the ghost of her father, and he took her hand, guiding her back into town to join her friends and family as the town faded away around them. David Lordley was a very strange boy, but he had no idea of it. He thought he was as normal as all his classmates, except nobody liked or felt comfortable around him, which made him feel left out of everything. His parents were very worried about him, thinking there might be something wrong with him. Let me fill you in on his circumstances. He was born at 3 a.m. on the third day of the third month to parents who inexplicably died the moment he was born. So he was adopted by his current parents, Martin and Fiona Lordley, who loved him to bits. 10 years had passed since then, and they had started to notice how different he was from the other children. Martin sat him down one afternoon and asked him how school was going. "Terrible," he replied sadly. "Why, son?" asked Martin. "I have no friends, Dad. Nobody there likes me," David told him sadly. Fiona sat next to him and pulled him into a cuddle as he burst into tears. "They say I'm a weirdo," he cried. As he cried, Fiona caught some of his tears, which turned to crystals as they touched her hands. "David, sweetie," she said. "Yes, Mum," she replied. "Your tears have turned into crystals," she told him, showing him one of the crystals. He looked at it in confusion and amazement. "This fell from my eyes?" he asked. Martin took another one. "It appears so, son," he replied. This was only the start of the strangeness they all started to notice, as they all started to notice more weird things starting to happen. As David made his way home, that should be from the shop, he was forced to wait for someone to let him cross the road, which nobody did. "Oh, come on! Somebody let me cross, will you?" he said out of frustration, suddenly finding himself safely on the other side of the road. He was shocked. "How did I get across the road?" he asked. He looked at his hands to find a red and blue mark on his palms. He picked up his shopping and walked on like nothing had happened. Along the way, he met his neighbor, a kindly gentleman named Dennis Justin. "Would you like a hand there, David?" he asked. David accepted Dennis's help and was grateful to him for his help. He was so happy to have some genuine kindness dealt to him by a fellow human being. He glowed yellow and beamed a thumbs up badge onto Dennis's chest. Martin and Fiona invited him in for a cup of coffee and a chat. I think I know why strange things happen around your son, he told them. Why is that, Dennis? Asked Fiona. I think it's some kind of magic that's fueled by his emotions, Dennis told them. That would explain these, replied Martin, placing the crystals from earlier into into his hands. These were David's tears, he told him. Dennis looked at the crystals. Amazing, said Dennis. Has anything else happened relating this day? No, relating to this day? Asked Fiona. I was forced to wait to be let across the busy road, but no one did. So I got frustrated and found myself teleported to the other side of the road, David told them. And when I met him in the street and helped him carry his bags home, he was so happy to be shown kindness. He put this badge on me, Dennis told them. Martin and Fiona looked at each other and then at David. David, honey, I think it's time we told you something important, Fiona told him. I'm adopted, aren't I? Said David at once. How did you know we were going to say that? Asked Martin. I could read it on your minds, replied David, looking crestfallen. In that case, there's more. Your birth parents died giving birth to you, Fiona told him. When was this? Asked David. You were born on the 3rd of March at 3 in the morning. Your parents tragically died as soon as you were born, she told him. And so you and Martin decided to take me in and raise me as your own? Asked David. That's right. No matter what any genetics say, you are our son. We love you to bits, and we want you to be happy, Martin assured David, smiling. Martin assured. David smiled at his parents. Mum, Dad, I love you both forevermore. You are my real parents. You brought me into your home as an infant. You raised me as your own son, and have shown me lots of love and kindness, and I really appreciate it, he told them before giving them a massive hug. He cried happy tears, so his tears hardened into golden marbles as they dropped to the floor. Dennis picked one up without burning his hand. As he held it, it transformed him. He transformed into his true form, a wizard. The family were amazed to see this. You're a wizard? Exclaimed David. Yes, David, and so are you. You have inherited your parents' genes. Your birth parents were Louis and Marie Barriers, two of the most important people to our whole community. The most powerful witch and wizard of their generation, he told him. And that, guys, is the end of Even More Things That Go Bump in the Night. I know one of those was a fantasy story, but I try and do these in lieu of the Twilight Zone, and there's a lot of fantasy stories in that show, so that is it for the Halloween specials this year, guys. If you enjoyed this video, or indeed this trilogy of videos, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have us a magical time. Hey guys, and welcome back to some magical gaming after the Halloween period. We now get back into some more non-holiday themed stories, and I'm going to kick off a new segment in the show, the Leap Year Girl segment. And so, without further ado, let's get on with the first story in that segment. This is Amanda Richmond. Most of us were born on common days such as the 30th of June or the 2nd of April, but that's not the case for Amanda Richmond, the main character of our story. She was born on the 29th of February 1980, which meant her official birthdays only happen once every 4 years, meaning also that she aged 1 year every 4. Officially, that is. Her unusual birth on that day was the cause of her even more unusual growth, as she grew 4 times slower than everyone else she knew and loved. It was now March 1984, around 2 weeks after her first official birthday, and she was having fun with her older brother Mark, thus making her the youngest of 2. They were playing Snap, which she turned out to be quite good at it for a first-time player. Yes, it felt strange to her when she learned the reason for her aging the way she did, because she was born on the 29th of February in 1980, a leap year. When the press got wind of it, they dubbed her the leap year girl, leading her down the road to fame for being the only person in known recorded history to be born on the leap day of a leap year. Her mum, Helen, wasn't sure her little girl could handle all the admiration she was now set to receive, and tried to protect her from the news hounds and paparazzi. Her dad, Matthew, was worried about his daughter's future if this kept up, as she was nowhere near ready for a life of fame and fortune. She was very close to her parents, but she was closer to Mark, her 13-year-old brother, and they did lots of things together. The downside of the, to her misfortune of celebrating an official birthday every 4 years was she'd only live around 25 years officially if she was lucky, which frightened her the most. Dying when most 25-year-olds would be starting their own lives. She'd be starting school in 6 months, and she was looking forward to it. The upside to this situation was that she'd officially leave school by the time she was officially 4 years old, due to her birthday, although she'd be counted as being 16 by that time. Imagine being a licensed driver by the time you're officially 5 years old, because you were born on the 29th of February, albeit 20 by technicality. Amanda didn't have to imagine it, as she was going to actually live it out. And September soon came, and she was ready for her first day of school, and was thrilled to be starting, and liked her teacher, Mrs. James, straight away, and Mrs. James adored her, and was most intrigued by her unusual birth date, knowing that, in the coming years, she'd be the youngest person ever to leave school, drive a car, earn a degree, work, get married, have children, retire, etc. This was because, although she was technically 4 years old, she was officially only 1. making her the youngest person ever to start primary school. Amanda's 5th technical birthday was in 5 months, as they'd be having that on the 28th of February 1985, even though officially she'd only be 15 months old. That's it for this episode, guys. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and have a magical time.